This week on Political Capital, Obama's 2012 budget, panned by the right and the left. Did the president punt?
Let's use a scalpel. Let's not use a machete.
Ken Conrad, chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, wants to get serious about the deficit now. He's our guest. And in the last word, a diplomatic crisis threatens American relations with Pakistan. We begin the show with Senate Budget Committee Chairman Ken Conrad. Thank you for being here, Mr. Chairman.
Good to be with you.
The House, as you know, is passing a $60 billion cut in the current fiscal year budget. It goes to the Senate. What will happen?
Well, it will not be successful in the Senate, even though I think virtually everybody understands we've got to cut spending.
How big a cut will the Senate do, would you guess?
It depends very much how you count what the House is doing, but about half of what the House is doing.
About half.
And, you know, it's interesting because every bipartisan commission that's considered this question has said start modestly with the cuts because of the economic weakness, but pass a plan now that over 10 years has really big changes.
We're going to really get into that, but just let me first ask you this. House Speaker John Boehner seemed to raise the stakes a little bit when he said, I'm not going to pass a short-term CR without the kind of significant cuts the House made. Is he bluffing? Do you think that there could be an impasse over this?
Well, I don't know, but that kind of talk, absent negotiations, really risks a shutdown of the government, which is in no one's interest. And I hope he'll, instead of issuing that kind of threat, negotiate. Right. That's what we do to resolve problems.
Speaking of negotiations, last year your condition for approving the debt ceiling increase was the Fiscal Commission, in which you served, which made very bold recommendations. What are you going to demand this year?
Well, I am not going to issue a public demand. What I want very much is to have a comprehensive long-term plan that reduces the deficit and about the size and scale of what the Commission recommended, which is $4 trillion over the next 10 years, because that not only stabilizes the debt, but begins to reduce it.
Can you do that before you do the debt ceiling, do you think?
I think we could have a framework agreement. Certainly you couldn't have a plan that's implemented because just the legislative drafting and the scoring of it, the legislative details take more time. But you could have a framework agreement.
Is it possible for a framework or the ultimate deal to do that without significantly higher taxes?
Yes, without significantly higher taxes. You know, but in fact, you could lower tax rates. What the Commission recommended was broadening the base, reducing exclusions, deductions, credits, because we're spending $1.1 trillion a year in tax expenditures.
They do propose that, but 1/3 of their deficit reduction comes from revenues,
it
right?
Does.
So what I'm asking, can you do it without that kind of a revenue gain?
No, but let me just be clear. By broadening the base, that gives you enough money to not only reduce the deficit combined with spending cuts and entitlement reform, but it also allows you to reduce tax rates to make America more competitive. Right. And that's, I think, the great appeal of what the Commission recommended.
Well, one of the members of your Simpson-Bowles panel, which got 11 out of 18 votes, one vote it didn't get was Paul Ryan, who was the House Budget Committee chairman. He flatly stiffed the recommendation. Now, he's called for major reductions in spending and entitlements and no tax cuts, but tax increases rather, but tax cuts. As you say, he wouldn't balance the budget for half a century. Why do you think you can have a grand framework with someone like Paul Ryan?
Look, I hope we can. Congressman Ryan's roadmap does not balance for 53 years.
Right.
He actually increases the debt quite dramatically under his plan, runs very large deficits in 2020, 2030, 2040. I don't think that is a roadmap to solvency for this country.
Well,
I think that's a roadmap to further decline.
The other side is Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer, two of the 3 Senate Democratic leaders, have said no, nothing on Social Security. Off the table, it's not part of the debt problem. Do you think you can do this without addressing Social Security?
You know, the Commission, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about this, the Commission did not use any savings from Social Security for the deficit. The savings from Social Security were used solely to extend the solvency of Social Security for 75 years. So do I think Social Security needs to be part of a deficit reduction package? No, I don't. Social Security is not contributing to the deficit. Our problem is in other entitlement accounts. It's in domestic
So that
spending,
doesn't have-
including defense, and it's on the revenue side.
So that doesn't have to be part of any package. Social
No, I
Security.
think
That's a separate
in
issue.
terms of a deficit reduction package, Social Security does not need to be included. I believe Social Security does need to be dealt with because we know in 2037, Social Security will become insolvent, and at that point you'll have to have a 22% across-the-board cut.
You told last week the Grand Forks Herald, you didn't know that I read the Grand Forks Herald, I know, Senator, that you're not sure
It's good paper.
There's enough national leaders to deal seriously with these fiscal challenges. After ducking in the budget and in his press conference last week, do you think that Barack Obama has the stuff to really, really bite the bullet on these fiscal challenges?
I do. And let me just say, I believe he was right not to embrace the commission product in his budget. I believe that if he would have embraced the commission at this stage, many on the Republican side, and especially in the House, would have immediately rejected it for political advantage. And that would not improve the chances of getting a successful negotiation.
Right. You are retiring next year, so that makes you a bit more of a free agent. You can be more candid. You also have a great legislative feel. As of now, what are the odds that you'll get this grand bargain in 2011 on fiscal discipline?
It is extremely hard to do. And the reason it's extremely hard to do is because if you take a poll of the American people, they reject virtually everything that has to be done. You know, here we are, we're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. Revenue is the lowest it's been in 60 years as a share of the economy. Spending is the highest it's been in 60 years. You got to work both sides of the equation, and frankly, the American people don't want to touch the entitlements. They don't want to touch defense. They don't want to touch revenue. The only thing they do want to do is cut foreign aid, which, as you know, is much less than 1% of the budget.
So what are the odds?
I think it's tough. I think it's very tough.
Less than 50-50?
You know, I hate to put a percentage on it because it is so important that we do it.
Let me ask you one foreign policy question. Unrest in the Middle East, it spread to Tunisia, to Egypt, elsewhere, the strong
Libya.
street democracy forces. Should the United States government actively encourage these demonstrations against some autocratic regimes that have been allies of ours?
You know, it's a very fine line. Frankly, there are limits to American power and influence. You know, you may not know, I graduated from high school from an American Air Force base in Tripoli, Libya, North Africa, so I've lived in that part of the world. And if there's one thing that's clear to me when I left there, is that those of us raised in Western culture have a very hard time understanding their culture. And the idea that we are telling them much that's going to have great influence, I think, is a sign of hubris, and our ability to influence outcomes is limited. We ought to set a good example. The fact is, democracy and the basic freedoms that we enjoy are things that I think people around the world aspire to.
Okay, well, Senator Ken Conrad, thank you so much for being with us. And when we come back, Egypt-inspired protests roil the Arab world and putting the U.S. budget on a crash diet. We'll talk to our reporters next. Welcome back. The president defended his use of the scalpel on the 2012 budget. The Republican response in the House, they took a meat cleaver to the 2011 budget. Bloomberg's White House correspondent Julianna Goldman and congressional correspondent Lisa Lerer join me. Julianna, let me start with you. The president released his budget, held a press conference on it later in the week. Both were generally panned. Does the White House think they're on the defensive on these issues?
A little bit on the defensive, Al, and that's why you saw the president come out the day after the budget was released with that press conference to defend it. But, you know, on the one hand, they say that the budget shows that they are serious about making significant cuts to the deficit, to address the deficit issue, the $400 billion spending freeze, other serious cuts. But at the same time, the White House says, look, we're in a divided Congress right now. We don't have to put forth this grand master plan right now. We need Republicans to come to the table. This needs to be a bipartisan discussion.
Well, they met with the congressional Democratic leaders a few days ago. Is everyone on the same page? Are all the Democrats on the same page here?
No, but that's what they're
That's why they're Democrats.
Right, that's why they're Democrats, and that's why they're meeting with House leaders one day, Senate leaders the other day. They're trying to figure out where they can come together, where they can put up a united front to push forward on these spending cuts.
Lisa, the new House Republican Authority has really worked its will on a big bill for the first time, cutting about $60 billion from this year's budget. What have we learned about the new House?
So the big question coming into this Congress was, are these new freshmen going to change Washington, or will Washington change them? And so far, I think we're seeing a point for the freshmen. They broke with leadership over a whole bunch of issues, not only not funding the second G strike engine, which is, of course, something John Boehner really wanted funded, but they also sided with Democrats on a bunch of issues like funding for legal aid and for first responders. So you're seeing that Speaker John Boehner, he's really going to face a challenge keeping these guys in line. So far, he's taken more of a carrot and less of a stick approach. Informal dinners, wining and dining them a little bit at different places around town. Not as much, serious vote whipping, but it's going to be a challenge for him and the Republican leadership in the House for sure.
John Boehner sure knows how to wine and dine. We know that. Your colleague Julie Davis had a scoop. The prominent Democratic pollster Jeff Garin delivered a pretty sobering message to Senate Democrats. Republicans are winning the spending deficit battle.
Right. I think we're definitely going to see Democrats try to do more spending cuts. They're talking about that now in the Senate. And one thing they're doing is there's this bipartisan group coming together with Mark Warner and Saxby Chambliss that want to tie a tax reform to deficit reductions and even maybe deal with entitlements, which is, of course, something that everyone in Washington is talking about, but nobody really wants to go first on presenting a plan, certainly not in Congress. So we should see some spending cuts, serious spending cuts come out of that group.
Okay, that's the so-called grand bargain. Entitlements, taxes, everything else, Julianna. Does the White House think that that's in the offing this year and they're just biding their time, or is it a pipe dream?
They are being really careful about how they telegraph this, especially how they telegraph
careful and cute.
Well, the way that the president is going to take, whether the president's going to be taking a leadership role here. What you heard the president say in his press conference the other day was he wants to get everyone at the table and have conversations over the next few months. But they're being pretty ambiguous with that.
You had a terrific piece Friday on the new White House chieftains, Bill Daley and David Plouffe. How does the Bill David show different from the Rahm and David show?
Well, first, John Boehner wining and dining Bill Daley, and John Boehner had dinner this week, so that's another example of wining and dining here in Washington.
Two pretty good pals, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, there was sort of a lack of discipline, a lack of organization in the West Wing before Daley and Plouffe came in. It's something that they felt was really necessary now, working with the divided Congress. You have all these new people coming into the White House, also looking ahead to 2012. But there's been a trade-off here. A lot of White House officials say that there's sort of a soul that's missing from the White House. Daley's door is usually closed, whereas Rahm's used to always be open. It allowed for staff to be allowed for Rahm to be more accessible.
More discipline, less collegiality.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about contagion in the Middle East. Does the White House worry they're getting behind the curve again?
Well, look, a lot of what we're seeing is a domino effect right now that can't necessarily be predicted what's playing out. The White House is feeling like they have calibrated their message a little better, but there can't be a monolithic approach here. The stakes keep getting higher, and they have to cater their message country to country, especially when you're talking about strategic allies like Bahrain in the Middle East.
Lisa, you covered one of the leading Republican politicians this week, Sarah Palin, up in New York. Did she mention Bahrain? Did she mention Egypt? Did she mention the Middle East when she was asked questions?
Well, I know this is going to be really shocking for you, but when she did mention Egypt, she was extremely critical of the White House.
She was?
Yes, shockingly critical of the White House. She said the message was confused. She also raised concerns about the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, of course, one of the major opposition groups in Egypt, saying that, she didn't really know what they were all about, and pointing to how they've, mentioned things about Sharia law that they agree with, and saying that she was very concerned about them having a seat at the table, and the U.S. need to watch their presence, as Egypt moves forward. She didn't, she wasn't really coming out with a clear policy about the Middle East, but she did take some shots at the White House.
She can't see it from her home, I know that. What is the Palin message on other issues when you actually got to see her?
Well, it's still being formulated for sure. She, of course, she's given some hints, but no clear signals that she's going to be running for the presidency. That's something everyone in town is talking about.
Sort of likes to tease on it, doesn't she?
Yeah, she definitely does. And, that could be because she's trying to figure out whether she should run, which is what she says she's still deciding, or because she's trying to raise her her lecture circuit price. It's not clear. She did indicate that her campaign, if she were to have one, would be very unconventional, was her word. But she also said that she knows she would have to spend time in Iowa and New Hampshire, which is somewhere where she hasn't really been spotted as much as other potential Republican candidates.
Finally, one of the most remarkable stories this week, a 60-minute profile of Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown, who revealed he was sexually abused as a child. I guess that sort of candor will be a political plus in a tough re-election.
That story was really something, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not really the kind of thing you hear from too many politicians. He's the most popular politician, one of the most popular politicians in Massachusetts. So this is, and part of that is because he's sort of cultivated this regular guy persona. I think this adds to that. But listen, he's going to face a tough race. Massachusetts is a bluer than blue state. Obama's going to be on the ticket. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out.
Okay, thank you both very much. And when we come back, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie for president and sex in Italy. The last word right after this break. Welcome back. We'll go to Margaret, Carlson, and Cato Berg in just a moment. But first, the issue of diplomatic immunity is at the center of a growing crisis that threatens U.S. Pakistan relations. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, John Kerry, traveled to Islamabad for damage control this week. Horace Anwar is Bloomberg News government reporter in Islamabad, and he joins us now. Horace, let me ask you, what is the root of the U.S.-Pakistan dispute over the fate of American Raymond Davis, who's accused of killing 2 Pakistanis?
Hi, El. Yeah, this is a very complicated issue here in Pakistan. The problem is the U.S. is claiming that this guy who killed 2 Pakistanis in the eastern city of Lahore has a diplomatic immunity. It is now up to the Pakistani courts to decide whether Mr. Davis has got an immunity or not.
Horace, he is not a diplomat, though, in the traditional sense, is he? Who is Raymond Davis, and what did he do?
That's the biggest question everybody asking here in Pakistan, that what actually Mr. Davis was doing here, you know. He was carrying a gun, and he was traveling through downtown area in the city of Lahore. And while he was approached by 2 robbers, he got them killed. So the U.S. position is that he's a member of their technical staff employed with the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad. That's all the U.S. Embassy, U.S. State Department has told so far. And the people here in Pakistan are questioning whether he is a diplomat, he's working for the CIA, whether he's a private contractor, what actually his role is. So, and that is also playing in the hands of religious and political parties here.
And Horace, are they stoking anti-American sentiment in Pakistan?
That's the biggest downfall of this whole unfortunate incident, that this is playing into the hands of religious and political parties who are questioning the government role in this whole war on terror, and why the government has allowed the U.S. diplomats to carry arms in our streets.
Okay, Horace, thank you very much for that report. Let me go to Kate and Margaret now. Kate, a new star is born. Chris Christie, who's been governor of New Jersey for a little over 13 months, is he now the great hope for Republicans?
Well, Al, congressional Republicans who are determined to tackle Washington's fiscal crisis, not just kick the can down the road, make real cuts in spending, and also take on entitlement reform, are extremely encouraged by Chris Christie's experience in New Jersey. He's taken on the public sector unions. He's cut supposedly untouchable programs because of the enormous fiscal problems Jersey faces. And he seems to be rewarded. He's now more popular than he was when he was elected. Now, whether or not Chris Christie, who is a straight-talking, plain-spoken Jersey Republican in a blue state, is willing to take his agenda beyond New Jersey, is the hope of some other Republicans. But he seems to have closed the door pretty firmly on that.
Margaret, you think he's a GOP heavyweight?
He is, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Yes, he's a real star in the party. He's a former prosecutor, and like former prosecutors who become governor, he has an earthiness to him and a vigor and a strength. And it comes across as this authentic politician, of which we have so few. The one thing about him is that he's crowing a little about being this guy. He did his poll ratings in a speech the other day at AEI. He said, I have 54% and look what I've done. You don't want to be self-referential, and you don't want to relish too much being the tough guy, or you'll end up like the governor in Wisconsin with a huge protest on your hands.
Let me change the subject. At the risk of making myself blush, is Italian Prime Minister Berlusconi going to go on trial for sexcapades?
Well, let's see if I can make you blush. Here's this crooner on a luxury cruise line who becomes the biggest mogul in Italy and prime minister and seems to have 9 lives no matter what he does. But now 3 women judges he's been indicted. He's going on trial. They had the authority to raid his harem house where there are young girls dressed up in nurses' outfits and police uniforms. And Italy may have had too much. Now, one person told me, you know, it's going to take either a collapse of the economy or altar boys to really do in Berlusconi, but this is close.
This makes Louisiana look puritanical, Kate.
Unbelievable story. We love the Italians. You know, when we were going through the Clinton scandals, European sophisticates was scoffed at the American reaction.
Right.
You know, we're a bunch of puritanical rubes.
Right.
So they seem to have an enormous tolerance for this sort of thing. But some time ago, I asked a friend who knows Italy really well, have they finally had it with this prime minister, then married, weakness for the young lady, shall I say? And he said, Kate, his constituency is Italian men. So he implied he'll be fine. But now women have taken to the streets. A lot of this, of course, is generated by politics. His political opponents can't dislodge him any other way. But given the efficiency of the Italian judicial system, he might be hanging in there for some period of time.
Boy, I tell you, the food and wine's great, but the judicial system. Kate and Margaret, thank you very much, and thank all of you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Political Capital is a production of Bloomberg Television.